The Caribbean night clung thick with shadows, swallowing the stars whole as a storm raged across the midnight seas. Waves crashed like battering rams against the sea serpent, a dark ship infamous for its speed, and the notorious woman who commanded it. Zara Storm, Captain Storm to those who valued their necks, stood at the helm, eyes cold, posture unflinching, as lightning shattered the sky behind her. She wasn't born into this life. She'd seized it, and every ounce of her hard-won power was about to be tested. Rumors had carried her this far, whispers of a cursed treasure that lay hidden on the forbidden Isle of Shadows, a place where even the most fearsome of pirates dared not tread. Zara's gaze cut through the driving rain, her focus locked on her crew. Ragged but loyal, they were a band of outcasts, survivors, and rogues bound by a loyalty that was only rivaled by their hunger for riches. Behind her, a man stepped forward, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Captain," he called, a mixture of awe and fear in his tone. "Is it true then? This treasure? It's said to grant the power of the sea itself, but they say it comes with a curse." Zara met his gaze, her expression unreadable, and grinned. "If a curse stands in the way of power, then I say let it try to stop us." Her voice, strong and resolute, silenced any remaining doubts. The promise of gold, the allure of a mythical power, all of it had seduced her beyond caution, beyond the fear of curses or superstitions. Her navigator, a wiry man named Sable with a map tattooed onto his back, watched her in silence, fingers tightening around the battered map in his hands. He had warned her about Isla de las Sombras, told her tales of men who sailed to its shores only to vanish or return as shadows of themselves. But Zara was unmoved. She thrived on the thrill, the challenge, and the idea that she could become something no one had ever dared to be, a queen feared by all. "Land ahead!" came a cry from the crow's nest, slicing through the roar of thunder. The black silhouette of an island loomed in the distance, partially obscured by a thick, unnatural mist that twisted and swirled like grasping fingers. The crew fell silent, their bravado wavering as the island drew nearer. Isla de las Sombras was not a place of legends. It was a place of nightmares. Yet here they were, bound by Zara's ruthless ambition and the promise of a treasure no other pirate had dared to claim. "Before we set sail, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? And if you were part of this crew, what role would you take on? The navigator? The lookout? Let's see who's brave enough to join this adventure." The sea hissed and churned around the sea serpent as they reached the shore, and the island's cursed air settled heavily upon them. There was no warm breeze, no gentle rustling of leaves, only silence and the faint, unsettling whispers of voices that seemed to echo through the dense fog. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, clutching their weapons with knuckles white and grim. Zara disembarked first, her steps unwavering as her boots sank into the wet, dark sand. "Keep your eyes sharp," she commanded, her voice a low growl that cut through the eerie quiet. "If anyone's got nerves to lose, leave them here. We're not turning back until we find it." The silence broke as Sable, always the cautious one, stepped forward, map in hand. "Captain, this island's cursed. Whatever power lies here, it's not meant to be disturbed." Zara didn't look at him, didn't need to. Her gaze was fixed on the dense jungle beyond, the supposed path to the ancient temple that held the treasure she sought. "What lies here, Sable, is mine for the taking," she replied, her tone final. But as they ventured deeper into the shadows, the air thickened, and a palpable sense of foreboding settled over them. Branches clawed at them like skeletal hands, the thick vines and twisted roots seeming to pull them in, as though the jungle itself was alive. Their progress was slow, and every step seemed to echo with a faint whisper, voices from the past warning them away. Yet Zara pressed forward, her eyes blazing with determination. She could feel the island's darkness watching, but fear was a luxury she'd long since discarded. The whispers grew louder, shaping into words, old phrases in a language lost to time. Sable muttered uneasy prayers, his eyes darting over his shoulder as if expecting something to strike. Zara paid him no mind, her focus solely on the goal. Her hand clenched the hilt of her cutlass, her senses sharp as they reached a clearing where ancient stone pillars rose from the earth, marked by strange symbols and stained with age. But before they could step further, a deep rumble shook the ground, and the fog thickened, swirling into a figure, a spectral form with hollow, piercing eyes. The crew froze, breath stolen by the sight. The specter's voice resonated, a sound like crashing waves and thunder as it spoke. "Who dares disturb the island of La Marea Oscura?" Zara's grip tightened on her sword, her pulse quickening, but she stood her ground. "I am Zara Storm," she declared, her voice unwavering, "and I've come for what belongs to me." The figure's eyes burned like embers in the mist. "To claim the power you seek, you must sacrifice your freedom, bind yourself to the sea's darkness. Only those with a heart unyielding as stone can withstand the weight of what lies below." The crew shifted, horror etched across their faces. But Zara only smiled, the flicker of defiance in her gaze. "Then so be it," she said, sealing her fate with a challenge that reverberated through the fog. In that moment, the specter's eyes dimmed, and the fog began to part, revealing a hidden path that led deeper into the heart of the island. Zara turned to her crew, her voice sharp and relentless. "We're close. Stick together and don't falter. This treasure is ours." Without hesitation, she plunged forward, leaving her crew with no choice but to follow. Though each step seemed to cost them a piece of their courage, they ventured deeper, past symbols and relics of a long-lost era, until the dense jungle opened up to reveal the entrance of an ancient temple. Its jagged stone walls loomed high, casting dark shadows as the echoes of the specter's words rang in their ears. As they approached, Zara felt the thrill of triumph mixed with the faint touch of dread. She was a step away from unimaginable power, but there was no turning back, not from a journey that would reshape her destiny forever. The temple's entrance loomed before them, a dark maw framed by ancient carvings that whispered of forgotten rites and dangerous power. Each step forward felt like crossing into another world, a world bound not by sunlight and sky, but by shadow and secrets. Zara Storm led her crew into the yawning blackness without hesitation, her blade drawn, her eyes scanning every inch of the dark stone for any sign of traps or movement. Inside, the air grew colder, and every sound echoed back at them, distorted by the narrow corridors and massive, looming statues of sea creatures carved from obsidian. Her crew followed, their faces grim with barely contained dread, whispering their unease among themselves. It was a rare sight. These were hardened pirates, each scarred and ruthless in their own right, but now they looked like children lost in the dark. The silence was shattered by a sudden, piercing scream, echoing from deep within the temple's heart. The men tensed, eyes wide, hands clutching weapons with white-knuckled grips. Zara didn't flinch, but she felt the tension behind her, the faint tremor in her navigator's hands as he unrolled the battered map. "It's not far now," Sable whispered, pointing to an indistinct marking near the center of the map. "We'll reach the inner chamber soon, but if the stories are true, the curse will protect it." "Stories are nothing but tales to keep cowards at bay," Zara replied, pushing forward without looking back. But as they advanced, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of eyes following their every step from the shadows. The path led them into a grand chamber, where ancient stone walls rose high above, covered in glyphs that pulsed faintly with an eerie blue light. The carvings depicted scenes of great battles between man and sea, of ships torn asunder by monstrous creatures that looked almost alive, their eyes seeming to flicker and move within the stone. At the center of the chamber lay an altar, and atop it a chest of black iron, adorned with symbols that looked as if they'd been etched by the claws of beasts. The crew hesitated, their fear palpable as the air grew thick and heavy with foreboding. Zara, however, stepped forward, her eyes locked on the chest. Whatever power lay within, it would be hers, curse or no curse. She raised her hand to touch the chest, but Sable's hand shot out, gripping her wrist. "Captain, no!" His voice trembled with a fear she hadn't seen in him before. "The legends say only those who surrender their will can survive the chest's curse. It binds you to the sea, makes you more shadow than flesh." Zara's eyes flashed, and she wrenched her hand free. "If the sea demands a price, I'll pay it," But I will not back down before mere stories. This treasure is the key to power that no other pirate has ever wielded. Her words hung in the air, heavy with challenge. She grasped the chest's iron handles and lifted it. Immediately, a wave of cold washed over her, chilling her to the bone. The crew gasped, backing away as the carvings on the walls seemed to come alive, the creatures within them writhing and twisting as if angered by Zara's defiance. In the silence that followed, a deep rumble echoed through the chamber, and Zara knew they'd awakened something far older and darker than any legend. The air turned icy, and shadows coiled from the edges of the room, gathering into a swirling vortex at the center of the chamber. Within moments, a figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, spectral being clad in tattered robes of seaweed, its eyes dark as midnight, burning with a fierce, ancient rage. The crew froze, weapons drawn but useless against such a presence. The spirit's gaze fixed on Zara, and a voice as deep and unforgiving as the ocean reverberated through the chamber. You seek the power of the sea, Zara Storm, but power has its price. Will you bind your spirit to the curse of the depths, forsaking freedom for dominion over the waters? Zara's jaw tightened, her eyes locked with the ghostly figure. She felt its power pressing against her, testing her will. If that is what it takes to claim what's mine, then I accept. The spirit's form twisted, and its laughter was a sound like waves crashing on a distant shore. Very well then. But be warned, this power will consume you. Even the greatest captains cannot escape the pull of the curse. Zara nodded, her voice a whisper. I am no mere captain. The spirit's dark eyes glinted with an approving, dangerous gleam. With a flick of its hand, the iron chest opened, revealing a jeweled crown set upon a bed of shimmering coins. Each gemstone seemed to pulse with the faintest heartbeat, as if alive, and an eerie glow filled the chamber. Zara reached for the crown, and as her fingers brushed the cold metal, an electric thrill shot through her, filling her with a strength unlike anything she'd ever known. But the moment was short-lived. The instant she lifted the crown, the chamber shuddered, and cracks splintered along the walls, releasing more of the spectral energy that filled the room. The crew staggered back as the shadows began to take form, swirling into the shapes of monstrous sea creatures, their eyes fixed hungrily on the intruders. Captain, we need to leave, now, Sable shouted, fear making his voice sharp as a blade. No one leaves until I say so, Zara barked, though she could feel the dark power pulling at her, a tether forming between her and the cursed island. She stumbled, fighting the pull, but the crown's weight seemed to grow heavier, as if it too were alive, binding her to the very stones around her. The monstrous shadows surged forward, their jaws wide with ghostly fangs, their roars echoing through the chamber like the fury of the sea itself. Zara's crew, spurred into action by the sight, fired their pistols and swung their swords, but their weapons passed through the creatures like mist. Desperation filled the air as the creatures closed in, trapping them against the altar, their eyes fixed on Zara and the crown. Realizing the only way to survive was to break the island's hold over her, Zara gritted her teeth and reached for the crown's base where an ancient inscription glowed with a faint light. She began to recite the words aloud, her voice barely a whisper above the roaring shadows, each word tearing at her soul as the curse tightened its grip. But before she could finish, one of her crew, a young man named Thorn who had always been loyal, rushed forward shouting over the din, Captain, let it go. We'll die here if you don't. Zara's gaze hardened. This is no longer a treasure hunt, Thorn. This is destiny. And with that, she completed the chant, sealing her bond to the crown. In that instant, the shadows froze, their forms flickering as if caught between worlds. The spirit's voice filled the chamber once more, a dark laugh echoing as the shadows began to retreat, merging back into the temple walls. You are bound, Zara Storm, it whispered. The sea is now yours to command, but know that it will demand its price in return. The ground beneath them trembled, and with one last look at her stunned crew, Zara placed the crown on her head, her eyes blazing with a newfound power. She raised her arm and the shadows obeyed, wrapping around her like a dark shroud, marking her as the Queen of the Caribbean. But even as she claimed her prize, Zara felt the weight of the curse settle within her. The price had been steep, and though she now commanded the sea itself, she could feel the depths calling, a whisper that would haunt her every step from that day forward. "Back to the ship," she ordered, her voice sharper, colder than before as her crew stared at her, some with awe, others with terror. As they fled the temple, Zara could feel the shadows following, a reminder of the power she'd claimed and the curse that now bound her. The sea awaited, but so did the darkness, and as they sailed from Isla de las Sombras, Zara Storm knew that her life, and her fate, had changed forever. The sea serpent tore through the open waters like a blade, its dark sails rippling against a fierce, unnatural wind that seemed to rise and fall with Zara's every heartbeat. She stood at the prow, her newly crowned head held high, an otherworldly gleam in her eyes, her very presence radiating with the power of the curse she'd bound herself to. Her crew kept their distance, sensing the shift in her, their faces a mix of fear and awe. The dark aura around her was palpable, as if shadows clung to her like mist, reluctant to let her go. But her victory over the cursed island had come at a price. The sea itself seemed to pulse with her every command, obeying her whims but whispering back with a hunger of its own. It was as if the very waves she controlled now sought to ensnare her, a dark pact that bound them closer with each passing moment. Even her most loyal crew members had begun to look at her differently. Some whispered that the captain they'd once known was gone, replaced by something colder, something more deadly. Yet there was no time for hesitation, for as the sea serpent approached open waters, a flicker of movement in the fog caught Zara's eye. Shapes, faint at first, then unmistakably solid. Ships appearing on the horizon, black as night and lined with the tattered sails of the damned. It was the Phantom Fleet, a ghostly armada cursed to patrol the seas, guided by no master, until now. The crew murmured in disbelief, their eyes wide with terror as the fleet drew nearer, their cannons aimed directly at Zara's vessel. "Captain, we've got trouble on our hands," Thorne shouted from the upper deck, his voice taut with barely contained panic. "Hold steady," Zara called back, her voice a steady anchor against the rising fear. She raised her hand, the crown on her head glowing faintly, as if sensing the power of the cursed fleet. Her eyes narrowed, calculating. The cursed ships were bound by the same dark power that had claimed her, but she was their master now. Or so she thought. Zara lifted her arm, commanding the fleet to halt, her voice ringing with a dark authority that echoed across the water. "Stand down," she ordered, her tone laced with iron. For a moment the ghostly ships hesitated, their spectral forms wavering. It was a glimpse of her newfound power, a thrilling taste of control. But as she watched, the fog thickened around them, and a figure materialized on the lead ship's deck. A captain, his eyes hollow and blazing with unnatural light.
"Hey there! Quick message. Grab a paper, write down. You pirate. Our channel name. Come back soon. We've got incredible stories you won't want to miss."
His mouth twisted into a cold, unforgiving smile. "You wear the crown," he called out, his voice low and deadly, echoing over the waves. "But it is not yours to command. You are nothing but another soul bound to the sea's will." Zara met his gaze without flinching. "I am the Queen of the Caribbean," she replied, her voice steady, though the shadow of doubt flickered in her eyes. "And I am here to take what's mine." The spectral captain let out a harsh laugh that echoed like thunder. "You may command mortal men, but the sea answers only to its own. If you seek to challenge me, then prepare to meet the depths." With a single gesture, he signaled the fleet to attack, and the cursed ships surged forward, cannons firing in a blaze of spectral light. The sea serpent rocked as cannonballs tore through the air, their blasts erupting into bursts of green fire that licked across the decks. The crew scrambled, some panicked, others resolute, but all knowing that they faced an enemy beyond flesh and blood. "Return fire!" Zara shouted, her voice slicing through the chaos. Thorne and Sable, along with the others, moved to man the cannons, returning fire with everything they had. But for every cannonball that struck, the ghostly ships seemed to reform, their spectral hulls knitting back together, as if the damage were nothing but an illusion. As the battle raged, Zara sensed the darkness within her growing, a force coiled around her heart, urging her to give in fully to the curse. She raised her hands to the sky, calling upon the sea's power, her voice laced with desperation and fury. "O sea, hear me. I am bound to your depths. Now unleash your wrath upon those who defy me." The waters beneath them responded, churning with a violence that sent waves crashing against the cursed ships. For a brief, glorious moment, Zara felt a surge of triumph as whirlpools began to form around the enemy fleet, dragging them under. But the ghostly captain merely smirked, unaffected, and gestured toward her. "You cannot control what you do not understand, Queen," he sneered. "This power will consume you, just as it has consumed all before you." A wave of icy dread washed over Zara. She had believed herself invincible, bound by choice to this power, but now it felt as though she were merely a pawn in the hands of the very curse she had sought to master. She staggered, clutching the railing, feeling the weight of the crown pressing down on her, its influence creeping deeper, testing her will. "Captain!" Thorn cried out, his face pale as he took in her struggle. "You have to let it go. It's controlling you." Zara glared at him, defiant. "I am its master," she snapped, though her own voice wavered with doubt. "And I will see this battle through." Yet as she looked back at the fleet, the spectral captain's smirk widened, and he spoke words that sent a chill down her spine. "Then I will claim you as my own." With that, the ghostly fleet surged forward, and one by one his crew of shades leaped from their ships, their translucent, ghastly forms crossing the waters like phantoms. They boarded the sea serpent, their cold, dead eyes fixed on Zara, hands reaching out to claim her soul. Her crew fought bravely, swinging their swords through the spectral forms. But it was futile. Their weapons passed through the shades as though they were smoke. Zara was surrounded, the shades' hands reaching for her, clawing at her with ice-cold fingers that burned like fire. She fought against the tide of spirits, but her strength was fading, sapped by the curse that now gripped her with relentless force. The crown on her head seemed to tighten, as if it too were a chain that bound her to the enemy. Realizing she had no choice, Zara grasped the crown and pulled, wrenching it from her head. The moment it left her hands, the sea stilled. The cursed fleet stopped, and the shades wavered, their forms dissolving into mist. She held the crown above her, her voice a desperate plea. "Release me, and I'll surrender the power. Let my crew go free." The ghostly captain hesitated, his eyes narrowing. He seemed to consider her words, the flames in his eyes dimming. But then his smirk returned. "Too late, Pirate Queen. The sea has claimed you as its own." In a final act of defiance, Zara hurled the crown into the waves, watching as it sank beneath the churning waters. As it disappeared, a great roar erupted from below, and a whirlpool opened up, spiraling into the depths. The shades were pulled toward it, their shrieks echoing as they were sucked down into the dark maw of the sea. The sea serpent rocked violently, the crew clinging to anything they could hold as the whirlpool threatened to swallow them all. But Zara's defiance had broken something, freed a piece of her soul from the curse. She shouted to her crew, her voice fierce and unbroken. "Hold steady, this storm will pass." Summoning the last of her strength, she took control of the wheel, guiding the ship out of the whirlpool's deadly grasp. With each turn, she felt the pull of the curse weakening, releasing its hold over her, leaving only a cold emptiness where the power had once been. As the whirlpool closed, the cursed fleet vanished into the mist, leaving the sea eerily calm. The crew, battered and exhausted, looked to Zara with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. She had been their queen, feared and respected, yet now, standing amidst the wreckage of the battle, she looked more mortal than ever. In silence, Zara took a breath, her hands trembling as she looked out over the sea. She had survived the curse, but the power she had once craved was gone, and in its place was a knowledge that her time as Queen of the Sea had come at a greater cost than she could have imagined. As dawn broke over the horizon, casting the waters in a pale, uncertain light, Zara Storm knew she had been changed forever. The sea had left its mark on her, its queen no longer, but a captain scarred by the darkness she dared to wield. Her eyes hardened as she looked toward the horizon. The Caribbean lay ahead, but she sailed now as a different woman. The dawn broke softly over the Caribbean, its light casting long shadows across the deck of the sea serpent. Zara Storm stood alone at the prow, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Her once steady hands now trembled faintly, a reminder of the night's encounter with forces far beyond the mortal world. She had sacrificed the crown, rejected the curse, and yet the shadows of the curse lingered in her eyes. Her crew watched her from a cautious distance, torn between respect and fear, uncertain of what their captain had become. The sea was calm, eerily so, as if the waters themselves were watching, waiting. Zara's grip on the railing tightened. The power she'd once wielded, the authority of the pirate queen, had slipped through her fingers, leaving only the quiet of the morning and the silence that followed the storm. Sable, her loyal navigator, approached her side, his voice subdued but steady. "Captain, we made it," he said, glancing nervously toward the waters below. The crew had their lives and the cursed fleet had vanished into the mist. But the memory of the specters, their ghostly claws, and the hollow eyes of the phantom captain lingered like salt on an open wound. Zara nodded, though her eyes remained on the waves. "Aye, we made it, but not without a cost." Thorn joined them, his usually bright eyes dimmed by the horrors they had endured. "Is it over, Captain? That curse, it still feels like it's watching us." Zara's jaw tightened. She knew the truth he feared to speak. The sea had not let her go entirely, and though she had cast the crown away, something dark and unyielding had nestled within her, a faint whisper of the power that once gripped her. She could still feel it in the back of her mind, like a faint call echoing from the depths. "Let the past lie," Zara said, though her words felt as hollow as the wind. She turned back to her crew, her voice strong despite the weight in her chest. "We are not slaves to curses nor bound by powers we don't understand. We sail on to new waters, new fortunes, and we do it as free men and women." The crew murmured, nodding, reassured by her words, though their faces betrayed lingering doubts. But they were pirates, forged in hardship and bound by survival. They would follow her, whether into battle or against curses, because that was the way of the sea. Yet Zara knew that the curse was not entirely broken. The pull of the sea felt deeper, darker, and more intimate than before. Even now the waters seemed to beckon her, a subtle reminder that the pact she'd made had left a mark far more profound than she'd anticipated. As they sailed onward, the next port lay ahead. Port Aurelius, a pirate stronghold teeming with outlaws, mercenaries, and treasure hunters. The crew spoke of rest, supplies, and perhaps a good drink to drown the memories of Isla de las Sombras. But Zara sensed that the sea's shadows would not be so easily left behind. In the crowded, raucous tavern of Port Aurelius, the Broken Compass, Zara's crew found brief reprieve. They drank and shared exaggerated tales of their adventures, spinning out yarns about ghostly ships and battles with curses that had ended victoriously, leaving out, of course, the weight of Zara's gaze, her distant silence. As the night wore on, her crew settled into laughter, their fears dulled by ale and camaraderie. But Zara remained at the back, her mind still haunted by the memories of the spectral fleet and the cursed crown. Her hand subconsciously brushed over her chest, as if searching for something that was no longer there, but that had left a scar on her soul. She stared into her drink, the faintest trace of a smirk playing on her lips. Once, she had longed for power beyond reason, but now she understood its weight. Perhaps that was her curse, to have glimpsed the power of the sea and walked away, but never truly free of it. The door to the tavern creaked open, and a hush fell over the crowd as a stranger entered. A tall, imposing figure dressed in the uniform of the East Royal Navy. His sharp eyes scanned the room, settling on Zara with an intensity that made her blood run cold. Captain Elias Graves, known throughout the Caribbean for his ruthless pursuit of pirates, had arrived. He carried an air of authority and purpose, his gaze unwavering as he locked eyes with Zara. Her fingers brushed the hilt of her cutlass, her instincts prickling with the danger of his presence. The tavern fell silent, a collective breath held as they awaited the inevitable clash between the pirate queen and her new foe. Graves approached, his voice carrying an edge as sharp as any blade. "Captain Zara Storm," he said, his tone one of thinly veiled contempt. "It seems I finally have the pleasure of meeting the infamous pirate queen." Zara's lips curved into a smirk, her defiance returning like an old friend. You've found her, though I'm not one for formalities. What business does the mighty Royal Navy have with the likes of me? Graves's expression hardened. Word travels fast, Captain. I hear you possess a knowledge that no pirate should wield, a map to treasures that belong to the crown. Zara held his gaze, feeling the weight of the secret she now carried. Graves had no knowledge of the curse or the dangers that lay in wait, but she could see the hunger in his eyes, a desire for power not unlike her own. Her thoughts returned to the cursed crown, the power she had wielded, and the price she had paid. Graves wouldn't understand the true cost, but she knew he would stop at nothing to obtain it. She leaned back, her gaze cool, her tone mocking. If you're looking for the crown, you'll find it deep beneath the waves. But I wouldn't go seeking it. The sea demands a heavy price from those who would rule her. Graves sneered. Pirate superstition. I've seen your kind fall to musket and cannon. I do not fear the tales you spin. Zara's expression darkened, a flicker of the curse's shadow glinting in her eyes. Perhaps you should. With a quiet signal, Graves motioned to his men, who took positions around the tavern, blocking the exits. The crew tensed, hands drifting to their weapons, but Zara remained composed, her smirk unfaltering. She could feel the power of the sea within her, a faint echo of the curse that lingered, and she knew that if she called upon it, she might have one last chance to wield it against her enemies. But the price, it would be steep and irreversible. She looked around at her crew, at the men and women who had followed her through storms and darkness, and felt the weight of the choice before her. She had fought so hard to break free of the curse's grip, to reclaim her freedom. To invoke it again would mean binding herself to it forever. But to do nothing would mean surrendering her life and the lives of her crew to a man who would never understand the meaning of loyalty or sacrifice. With a slow, deliberate movement, she rose to her feet, her eyes never leaving Graves's. Her voice rang clear through the silence. You may think you've cornered me, Captain Graves, but the sea answers to no one, not even you. In one swift motion, Zara threw her drink across the room, dousing a candle that plunged the tavern into darkness. Chaos erupted as her crew sprang into action, weapons clashing against the soldiers, tables overturned in the frenzy. Zara, moving like a shadow through the melee, led her crew out through a hidden side door, her heart pounding as they made their escape. Outside, the dawn was just beginning to break, casting the harbor in hues of gray and blue. The sea serpent waited, and Zara led her crew aboard, her mind racing with the knowledge that her life as pirate queen was far from over. Graves would hunt her, the cursed crown's legend would linger, and the whispers of the sea would forever call to her. As the ship cut through the calm morning waters, Zara stood at the helm, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She knew now that the curse was her shadow, her constant companion on these waters. But she was Captain Zara Storm, Queen of the Caribbean in name and spirit. And if the sea demanded a price, she would pay it gladly, for the freedom she'd fought so hard to win. With a voice both defiant and resolute, she whispered to the waves, "The sea and I are one." And with that, the sea serpent sailed into the unknown, a ghostly shadow against the dawn, carrying a captain whose legend would echo through the Caribbean for ages to come. If you enjoyed this adventure, make sure to subscribe to You Pirate for more thrilling tales of the high seas. And don't forget to share this story with fellow adventurers. There's always another treasure to seek and another legend to uncover.